All right, so today is August 27th, 2022. My name is John Gorman. I'm here with
Bob, as the cameraman.
as a cameraman, and Mark Donnelly. And we are interviewing Gary Lehr. So yeah, let's get started. We'll start off with some questions about your early life. And first of all, thank you. We appreciate
My pleasure.
you taking the time to.
It's a good thing that you people are doing. It's nice to have this.
Thank you. So yeah, when and where were you born?
I was born in Fargo, North Dakota, February 21st, 1940, right between when the war started in Europe and when we got involved in Pearl Harbor after that. So between 39 and 41, so 1940.
Okay. Who were your parents and what did they do?
My dad was Marvin Lehr. He was raised on a farm. His first language was German, South Central North Dakota. And he wound up being first of all, a car salesman, and then he wound up being a branch manager in the food business, wholesale food business. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and as typical for North Dakota, she was, they were ethnically mixed. She was Norwegian, so her first language was Norwegian, so they eventually learned to compromise German, Norwegian, and spoke German. So, yeah. So, yeah, and so she was a stay-at-home mom, so all the way through school, she was at home. Well, my dad spent a lot of time on the road.
What did you speak? Did you speak German in the household?
Well, no, my dad, it was during wartime. We were fighting the Germans. So he wanted to make sure that his kids didn't speak German. But of course, you pick it up when you hear it. It's unavoidable. So to this day, I understand a fair amount of German. Not that I can, write it and read it. No, I can't. But anyway, I do have fairly good comprehension.
Gotcha. And you mentioned you're obviously fighting the Germans. Did you face any hostility at home?
No. I mean, that ethnic mix up there in North Dakota was just like that. Plenty of Germans, so in those years, as I recall, you didn't give somebody bad marks for being a German speaker just because we were against them, we fought them in the war. Most of them wound up as soldiers, And my dad, in fact, was not called into the military because he had asthma, so he was 4F. In other words, you were deferred because you were unaccepted. So I think he had a little guilt because of that, because I had all my uncles went off to war. And I was old enough to remember when they all came home. I had 4 of them that went off to war, and 3 of them came home wounded. So, and even for a little kid, that leaves an impression.
Right.
But they survived, and that was the main thing.
And did that influence family dynamics at all between?
No, well, only so much as when they all came home, those who weren't married got married, the soldiers. And so they were all anxious to get on with their lives, start families, farm, or whatever it was they were going to do. So, and they didn't really want to talk about the war. That was the thing that was so remarkable for all the things that they'd been through. They just didn't want to do it. So we had to pry a lot of that stuff out of them much later over time. And for me, personally, I never felt that I had enough information from all of them. And they're all gone now. So.
Interesting. All right. So when did you join the military, and what were you doing before?
Well, I was actually graduated from high school. I started early in school. Didn't go to kindergarten, so I graduated when I was 17. Okay. And my older brother he was like 18 months older. He had gone into the Air Force. I had a couple scholarships to go to college, but my dad said, well, maybe you want to do what Mark did. Maybe you want to go to the Air Force. And I thought, maybe not such a bad idea. So it was easy for me to choose the Air Force, not because it was the Air Force, but I was always in love with planes. Anything aviation, that was always my thing. Not that I ever wound up, flying military aircraft or being a regular on flight crews. No, I was not. But anyway, so I went in, graduated probably in June of '57, and then I was in by like October that same year. So I had basic training in San Antonio, Texas, at Lackland Air Force Base.
So that was before you were 18.
Yeah.
How did that work?
Well, I mean, it didn't make any difference to me because I had my peers who were a year older, so we were always together, so I didn't really see much of a difference there. So I just, in the end, it probably benefited me because by the time I was out of the Air Force and out of college, I was still really young. So by the time I had all that done, I was still only 23.
Wow.
So some of them were just 22 when they got out. I was only a year older and haven't satisfied the military obligation.
So what were you doing in your early days in the Air Force?
Well, running ragged through boot camp, like everybody does. I'm sure the Air Force was easier than the Army, Marines, maybe even the Navy, I don't know. But I had to wait for a school. When we were tested to go into the service as pilots with all services, they test your ability to do this or do that, how quickly can you learn and whatnot. And I had an opportunity to go to, some good electronic schools like radar or things like that. But they said, hey, you show that you have an ability in language. And they said, if you're interested, we can send you to, one of the language colleges, Syracuse University or Yale or out in Monterey. And I thought, well, that sounds nice, So I figured, well, here's a way to be in the service and still get some college credits. So I said, sign me up. And so finishing basic training, I had probably a month and a half, 2 months late before I could get into the next class. And I wanted to go to Syracuse University. And as it turned out, it was Russian. And they taught other languages there too. They taught Polish, Serbo-Croatian, and a few others. And I got to Yale, it would have been Chinese. Monterey was for Russian again, and that was for Army. But they sent Air Force people there too. So it was the time of the Cold War. And in '57, that was also the time the Russians got a jump on us space-wise and launched Sputnik, first satellite up there. So the Cold War was already at hand. We were facing off against each other in many different ways. In Korea through proxies and whatnot. We actually had troops there. So, and then learning the Russian, that was 14 months at Syracuse. We had all native teachers, and so it was total immersion. So it was, 8 hours of class a day in Russian, and probably another 3-4 hour class just trying to absorb what you already learned. And so in 14 months, you get pretty good at the language. And then after that, we were shipped overseas to various locations. And that would have been, for me, it would have been in '59, I think April of '59, I went over to Turkey and served not too far out of Istanbul in a not a remote site, but it was probably an hour and a half by boat away from the state. So, and that was in the U.S. Air Force Security Service. So it was basically intelligence work.
Mm-hmm.
And so about all I can say about that is that we and many other organizations were more or less watching the Russians in various ways, through voice, through electronic means, tracking things, listening, so
Okay. So I'm assuming your knowledge of the language meant you were mostly listening to kind of communications between Russian forces. Is that kind
Well, I
of
had no communication with Russians at that
listening?
point.
Yeah.
But I was very much aware of kind of what was the dynamics of what I was hearing, you know. So,
Is there a specific project or
well, I can tell you one thing that most people who were living around that time will remember. And I was in Turkey when the U-2 incident happened. The U-2 is a very special aircraft, which was very, very high flying. It was basically an aircraft with a jet engine that was a glider that could go at 70, 80,000 feet. And that aircraft flew from Pakistan right over the Soviet Union, and it was going to take pictures, and they had been doing that for a while. I didn't know this because that was hush-hush. I didn't have the need to know. I heard about it later, as we all did. And apparently, historically, we were right at the time where we were going to stop doing that because it was going from that to satellites for that kind of reconnaissance. And President Eisenhower decided that we'll do one more time because it was May Day, which was a big event in Russia, and they always were going to do something. And we were thinking that something was going to happen in a certain area of the Soviet Union, as the story goes. Not that I knew that, but that aircraft was shot down. And so that sabotaged a major event that was to happen between the Soviet Union President Khrushchev and our President Dwight Eisenhower. And you know, we looked a little lame initially before it was announced what happened. The Russians had shot it down, but they didn't say anything for a couple of days. And so we announced that this aircraft was lost over eastern Turkey on a weather mission. I mean, you say anything you have to in a situation like this. And then when the truth came out, you know, for me it was like, wow, we were doing that, isn't that great, you know? Even if it was shot down, that was sad. But the pilot of the plane became a household name, Francis Gary Powers. And he was in a Russian prison for a while. And he eventually was traded for a master Soviet spy in the United States. He was then the colonel in the KGB. And so, and he came back, and there were a lot of people that weren't too happy that, you know, he didn't betray the United States. I mean, he had a cyanide pill because he was, you know, that was given to him as a possibility that if he needed it, he had it. The main thing was to keep as much of that secret as you possibly could. But they had pieces of the aircraft and whatnot. So, to make a long story short, he eventually came back to the United States and got divorced. He became a helicopter pilot out in LA, and eventually crashed and then died. So, kind of a sad subscript to that. Yeah.
So people were upset that he didn't take his pill.
Yeah, I think a lot. Well, he was tried in a Russian court, and a lot of people thought at that time in the Cold War that he was too kind to the Russians and didn't fly our flag to the degree you probably should have. But, you know, none of us were in that situation, so it's hard to really condemn somebody when, you know, if you were in his shoes. But it was kind of a sad story, the way it ended. But after that, I came back, and so that was already in December of 2020. And so that's where I got out early, and not because, well, it was mainly because there were some cutbacks in the services. They had some budget restrictions. And so we had the opportunity to either sign up for an extension, like elsewhere. They said, well, you could go to Germany. We could put you to Germany there for an additional 12 to 18 months, whatever it was. Or you could go out early now if you wanted to. I chose to get out early. And so I remember we were discharged at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. And right after that, I went to see some friends in New Jersey. And there was a big blizzard. I mean, a huge blizzard. The entire city of New York was shut down. And I hadn't been home yet. And so I had about a 3-day train ride back to Minnesota. You know, because trains weren't going either. So, I mean, I remember going through Pennsylvania. It was just, the train was crawling, just crawling. So, you remember things like that. And then, after that, since I benefited from 14 months of college credits basically at Syracuse, I was able to get into the university winter quarter. And so I finished in another 2 years, basically. All right, another 2 years.
What year were you discharged from the Air Force, or that you moved back?
2020. No, not 2020. I'm sorry. I misspoke, certainly. I'm still in prison here now. But it was 19, let's see, it must have been 1960.
Okay. So Ike was still president?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was still president. That's
All
right.
right.
Thank you.
No problem. I was catching up.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that didn't sound right, but it just flowed out there.
Everything feels like
Yeah,
2020,
right,
so
right,
that's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, 1960.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you started at the U.
They started at the U, winter quarter in '61, and then graduated from the U in '63. And then that summer I went back to where my folks were living, Thief River Falls, and I spent the summer there working in I actually closed a small supermarket in East Grand Forks for my dad's firm. They were going out of business, so I just cleared it out. And then came down to the cities here looking for employment. And I went to work for Honeywell. They were adding people, so there was my chance in corporate America.
I'm not familiar with Honeywell.
Honeywell was, I don't want to call it a high-tech firm, but they made computers. And they were really an automation company, factory automation. And they were also a defense company.
Thermostats probably made by Honeywell.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
what was your degree in? What did you graduate?
Russian area studies. Russian area studies. Which was easy because I had all those credits in Russian. So that made me, that sort of attracted Honeywell as well, because I wound up working in an engineering department doing systems analysis work against the Russians' defense business.
Off Douglas or Duluth, straight up there? Or?
In Hopkins.
Okay. Yep.
Second Avenue.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a big facility there. And so I was there for about a year, and things were going well. I was really into the munitions business and what they were doing, whether it was making cluster munitions or mines or whatever. And what I was doing was like area studies and trying to do requirements analysis. What would you need if you were going to develop weapons against a massive Russian tanks coming through Germany, that kind of stuff. So all that stuff was going on. And that was interesting, and it was about 14 months after I joined, and doing well by everybody's estimation, that I was last in, and they had to make some cutbacks. I was first out. I found out about it New Year's Eve. And I was absolutely crushed. My first real failure in life. But as luck would have it, that was a Friday, and a following Monday, Honeywell in Washington, D.C. wanted me. So that was his major stroke of luck, which turned out to be much better fitted for me personally. So I spent 9 years in Washington, and I worked with, I was in the Pentagon a lot, worked with service customers, also worked commercial aviation, and spent a lot of time in Capitol Hill talking to staff members there and whatnot. So Washington is a place that every one of our citizens should spend a little bit of time, either an extended vacation, just going around getting a feel for it, or working. It kind of opens your eyes to a lot of things. So from there.
What years were you in Washington?
Washington would have been 1965 to 1974. I'm precise on that.
Those are
Yeah.
big years to be in Washington.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was, because that was 1968 was one of those seminal years.
Yeah.
The Vietnam War was going on, and it was hard for me going over to the Pentagon often and seeing, the list of people dying or killed there in the press office. I did that a couple times a week, getting their name, rank, serial number, where they were killed, how they were. That's tough to see. And for a long time after that, I didn't want to read anything about Vietnam. And there was sort of a lot of protests going on at that time. Martin Luther King was assassinated during that, 68. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. I had seen Kennedy a number of times. Of course, a lot of the public figures you see would be there because you're out amongst them, so they're going to be there. And then in 1972, Nixon was president, and he went over to Moscow to kind of start a dialogue to improve relations. That was called détente. And he also took with him a number of corporate top execs. I think there were like 15, 20 of them. Our chairman of the board was one of them. Jim Benner. And they decided that we would start corporate offices, representation offices, to try to improve trade between the two countries. So after that, they asked me, knowing my background, would I be interested in going over and setting up an office in Moscow? And I thought about it, and I thought, whoa, the big bad bear, Red Russia, and all the commies and stuff. And I thought, well, that could be a good opportunity. Maybe I think I could do it. And so I said, yeah, I might be interested in that. And so the corporation had to do a lot of sorting out about a lot of things. So about that. But they came back, and I had already had a family, a wife and 2 kids. And a year later, they came back and asked me if I was still interested. And that's when I asked my wife the serious question: what would you think if we went to Moscow, set up an office there? We would live overseas, and you would be there with me.
So the whole family would
The whole family would be there.
Kids too?
Kids too.
How old were your kids at that time?
They were young. They were like 2 and 6 at that time when we started. So I thought my wife's response was something to behold. She was a dental hygienist, graduated from And she said, if we can't do it, nobody can, which was a nice thing to hear. So they flew me back to Minneapolis, and so they made an offer, and I accepted. When I told my mother that this was what I do, I'll never forget her response. She said, "Oh, Gary, that was it." And she wasn't thinking of me. She was thinking of those little girls. I know that for a fact. Like, you're going to take them there. So that was a good experience for me. I mean, my Russian got really good while over there. I was totally immersed. I didn't need an interpreter, and so I was able to make presentations even in Russian, for sizable groups and negotiations and whatnot. And so we grew the business. We did a lot of things. And so it was a liaison office, representation office, and I was used to having people from various locations in Honeywell come in, from France, from the US, Japan, Germany, Austria. And so it was a good environment for our kids to learn about all these international types, Honeywell types, Honeywell employees, and non-Honeywell employees. So it was a good thing to learn. And from there I went to Brussels, Belgium, and I ran European-wide sales for industrial. And this was doing stuff in the oil industry, down into Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, through all, the customers were Shell and Exxon. Back then, Gulf and Texaco, you probably haven't heard of those, but they were there then.
So is this in the 70s?
Yeah, this was 78 to 81.
Okay.
78 to 81.
So just after the energy crisis and
Yep.
all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Energy crisis being in the early 70s, 74, 75, right in there. And so, but it was an exciting time to be in that kind of business, because technologically we were going from electric and pneumatic instruments into digital. And so our sales really zoomed. I mean, they were really, amazing growth. So that was fun to be a part of that. And then came back, and then one of the things when I went over to Russia and leaving, leaving Honeywell, I had a top secret clearance. And I had to give that up because that's just what it was. And I said, I would like to know that you can't guarantee anything. But when I come back from overseas, I'd like to just go on record that I hope no doors are closed to me because of that.
Because of the top secret.
Yeah, I gave it up, and obviously I wasn't involved in spying or any classified information when I was overseas. But they said, no, we can't guarantee, but I said, just want to let you know. And so as it turned out, I did go back into the military business at Honeywell. And so from 81 until basically I retired in 99. And retired a little early. And so since 99, I've actually been doing some consulting, which I'm doing to this day. And I'm consulting with the task force in Washington, D.C., and for the munitions industrial base. We are an advocate for our warfighters and making sure that our U.S. producers, names you recognize, General Dynamics, Northrop, and many of them, who are part of the task force, can maintain the industrial base, so if they need munitions, they can get them when they need them. We don't say, oh, you got to top up the budget by this amount of money. That's for them to decide. But if the money isn't there, and if you need it, it might take, if lines go down, it might take you 2.5, 3 years to get them going.